I never thought the scariest job I would ever have would be at the post office, but last month I opened a letter that should never even have been delivered. They hired me for something called the dead letter office, a forgotten corner of the main postal facility, down a hallway where the cleaning crew stopped coming, and the vending machine sat empty. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting sickly yellow light across the endless metal shelves packed with abandoned mail. The air tastes of dust and old adhesive, with an underlying staleness that reminds you of sealed coffins and forgotten storage units. It's exactly what it sounds like, a graveyard for undeliverable correspondence. Letters with smudged addresses, packages that circled the system forever, postcards written to people who no longer exist, or who never existed. My job was to catalog the dead mail, to shred what had no value, and occasionally attempt to reunite items with their senders. It's like playing postal detective with humanity's failed communications. Most days I worked alone, just me and thousands of messages that would never reach their intended destinations. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the metal shelving. The dead letter office had its own rhythms, its own strange logic. Mail arrives in waves, holiday backlogs in January, tax season confusion in April, summer vacation mysteries in August. You learn to read the patterns, to predict what kind of lost souls will surface in each batch. But some mail doesn't follow patterns. I found the first letter on a Tuesday in late January. It was buried beneath a pile of Christmas cards that had been circulating since December. The envelope felt different than the others. It was older somehow. Water stains had yellowed the edges into something resembling dried tears, and the paper felt soft, as if it had been handled countless times. There was no return address, but the recipient line made my stomach drop into my shoes. 412 Maple Street. That was my address. The name was smudged beyond recognition, ink bleeding into the paper like a wound. But I lived alone at 412 Maple Street, and I had lived there for 3 years without so much as a misdirected pizza flyer. I told myself it must have been meant for the previous tenant, someone whose forwarding address had expired in the postal system's memory. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the kind torn carefully from a spiral notebook. The handwriting wavered like someone was writing in candlelight, but the words were startlingly clear. "I'm sorry for what I did to Mrs. Patterson. The pills weren't supposed to work so fast. I counted them wrong. Please forgive me." There was no signature and no date, just a confession floating in postal limbo, as lost as everything else was in this place. Standard procedure dictated shredding anything without clear value or identification, but I found myself sliding the letter into my desk drawer instead, telling myself I'd process it later. The confession felt too specific, and too weighted with genuine remorse to feed that industrial shredder that devoured most of our intake. 3 days passed before I opened the drawer again. The letter sat where I'd left it, but the ink looked darker somehow, as if the words had been written more recently. I checked the envelope again. Still no postmark, no routing stamp, and no indication of how it entered our system. In the dead letter office, mail typically arrives through clear channels. Local facilities forward undeliverable items, or headquarters sends us overflow from their automated systems. Every piece gets logged, scanned, and tracked. But this letter existed in no database I could access. Janet, my only regular coworker, worked the morning shift while I handled afternoons. She'd been in the dead letter office for 12 years and claimed to have seen everything that could possibly go wrong with mail delivery. "You look like you've been staring at a ghost," she said Thursday morning as we overlapped during shift change. "Just trying to figure out where some of this mail comes from," I said, gesturing at the endless shelves. "Some of it doesn't even seem to have any tracking history." Janet shrugged, gathering her purse and coat. "Happens more often than you think. System glitches, manual sorts that bypass scanning, old mail that's been sitting in trucks or storage facilities for years. This place is where lost things come to die." But the next letter suggested something else entirely. I found it the following Monday, again during routine sorting, as if it had simply materialized among the other undeliverables. This one was addressed to 408 Maple Street, 4 houses down from mine. The house where Robert Smith lived with his adult son, David, though I'd only learned their names by checking the phone book that weekend, driven by a curiosity I couldn't explain. The envelope showed the same water damage, the same worn edges, and the same absence of postal markings, and the handwriting was identical to the first confession, down to the particular way the writer formed their lowercase e's. "I pushed him down the basement stairs when he found the money. The sound his head made against the concrete still wakes me up. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I couldn't let him tell anyone. Please don't tell anyone." My hands had developed a tremor by the time I had finished reading. This wasn't random. Someone was sending detailed confessions to addresses on my street, using the postal system as their personal confession booth. But how were these letters reaching the dead letter office without any processing history? That evening I drove past 408 Maple Street. David was in the backyard, digging what looked like a garden bed near the basement window. Normal landscaping for early February seemed unlikely, but I watched from my parked car as he worked methodically with a shovel, stopping occasionally to wipe his forehead despite the cold air. When he went inside, I noticed he left the shovel standing upright in the freshly turned dirt. The letters began arriving in increasing frequency, every 2 or 3 days, sometimes twice in a single week. Always confessions, and always addressed to houses on Maple Street, but never addressed to the people who actually live there. 410 Maple Street. I poisoned the stray cat that kept digging in my garden. I mixed antifreeze into the wet food and watched it from my kitchen window as it convulsed for 23 minutes. I timed it. 414 Maple Street. I stole the engagement ring from my sister's dresser while she was at work. She's been crying about losing it for 2 weeks now. The pawn shop gave me $800. 406 Maple Street. I hit the jogger with my car on purpose. She ran past my house every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m., and I got tired of her perfect life. The police think it was an accident. I created a map at home, plotting each address on graph paper like a crime scene investigator. The pattern was unmistakable. The addresses were spiraling inward towards my house. 420, 418, 416, 414, 412, 410, 406. Each confession felt more immediate than the last, more detailed, as if the writer was growing bolder or more desperate. The handwriting remained consistent, the same shaky script that suggested someone writing in poor lighting or under emotional stress. By mid-February, I was spending my lunch breaks researching. I used the local paper's online archives, police blotters, obituaries, even missing person reports. I searched for any mention of Mrs. Patterson, any unexplained deaths involving prescription medication, and any basement accidents or suspicious cat deaths or hit-and-run incidents involving joggers. But nothing. Either these were elaborate fictional confessions, or the crimes hadn't been reported. Or, the thought that kept me awake at night, they hadn't happened yet. Was there a possibility I was reading advanced confessions? Predictions rather than admissions? It made a horrible kind of sense. If someone was planning these acts, writing out their guilt before committing the crimes, it would explain the fresh ink on the aged paper, and the letters that appeared without entering the postal system through normal channels. But that raised even more disturbing questions. How did the writer know I worked in the dead letter office? How did they know their confessions would reach me specifically? Janet noticed my deteriorating state by the 3rd week of February. "You're jumping at shadows," she said, watching me tear through a bin of mail with unusual intensity. "And you look like you haven't slept in days." "I'm just trying to stay on top of the workload," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to myself. "Workload?" Janet laughed. "Honey, this is the dead letter office. Nothing here is urgent. The whole point is that these messages are already lost." I wanted to tell her about the confessions, about the spiral of addresses, about the crimes that might be planned for our neighborhood. But explaining would require showing her the letters, and I'd been taking them home every night, filing them in a shoebox under my bed like evidence in a case only I could see. The investigation consumed my evenings. I drove past the confessed addresses, noting the details and watching for signs that matched the admissions. The house at 410 Maple had a dead patch in the front yard where nothing would grow, and I could be wrong, but it's roughly cat-sized. The woman at 414 Maple looked haggard, older than her apparent age, and I'd seen her searching through her car and her purse with increasing desperation. But I never saw anything conclusive, never found proof that the confessions described real events. The ambiguity was worse than certainty would have been. The letters kept coming, each one addressed to a house closer to mine. The handwriting grew shakier and more urgent, as if the writer was running out of time. 404 Maple Street. I've been watching her through the bedroom window with binoculars. She undresses at the same time every night. I took pictures. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop. 402 Maple Street. I put broken glass in the Halloween candy last year. Only 3 pieces. Mixed it with good ones. I wanted to hurt someone, but I didn't want to get caught. The confessions were escalating, becoming more immediate and more violent, and the addresses were running out. After 402 would come 400, and then 398. The street ended at 396, but my house was 412, located in the center of that spiral. On Friday, February 18th, I found an envelope with no address at all, just my full name written across the front in that same deteriorating scrawl. First, middle, and last. Perfectly spelled. My middle name wasn't even on any work documents. I'd never told anyone at the post office what it was. My driver's license lived in my wallet, my social security card in a safe deposit box. There was no way the confession writer could know my complete name, unless they knew me personally. The letter was shorter than the others, written on the same lined notebook paper, but in handwriting that seemed to shake with exhaustion. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. She wasn't supposed to find the letters. Please forgive me. No signature, as always. But for the first time, I checked the postmark carefully, holding the envelope under a fluorescent light until I could make out the faded date stamp. February 19th. Today was February 18th. I stared at the impossibility in my hands. The Postal Service doesn't postmark mail for future dates. The machines are automated, pulling timestamps from internal systems that sync with atomic clocks. A one-day error might suggest system failure, but system failures don't target specific pieces of mail. This letter was postmarked for tomorrow. I called in sick the next day, something I'd never done since starting at the dead letter office. My house felt different with me in it during daylight hours. It was smaller and more exposed, as if the walls had thinned while I was away at work. I spent most of the morning researching postal database systems, trying to understand how a letter could exist in a system before being officially processed. The more I learned, the more impossible it seemed. Every piece of mail that enters official channels gets scanned at multiple points. Collection processing, transport, delivery. Even undeliverable mail maintains a digital trail until it reaches places like the dead letter office. But these confession letters had no digital footprint at all. That afternoon, I heard the familiar sound of my mailbox closing with a metallic clang. Through the front window, I watched my regular mail carrier, Tom, continue down the street following his normal route. He'd been delivering to Maple Street for 6 years and had never shown any interest in my personal life beyond weather-related small talk. In my personal mailbox, mixed with utility bills and grocery store circulars, was the same envelope I'd found at work yesterday, identical in every detail. The same water stains, the same lack of return address, same impossible postmark for February 19th. But when I opened it, there were 2 letters inside. The first was the confession I'd read before. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. She wasn't supposed to find the letters. Please forgive me. The second letter was written in different handwriting, cleaner and more controlled, with the careful penmanship I recognized from signing my own name on thousands of work documents over the past 3 years. It was my own handwriting. I'm sorry for what I did to make these letters stop. The fire wasn't supposed to spread to the other houses. I only meant to burn mine. Please forgive me. I don't remember writing it, but there's a book of matches in my jacket pocket, and my hands smell like gasoline.